Picture this. You throw away your marriage like yesterday's trash thinking you're upgrading, but what if I told you the woman you just divorced was carrying 3 babies, your babies, and sitting on $100 million you knew nothing about? Buckle up, because this story is wild. Before we dive into this unbelievable tale, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because you do not want to miss stories like this. Trust me, this one's gonna have your jaw on the floor. Now, let me tell you what happened. So let me introduce you to Diane. Beautiful sister inside and out. The kind of woman who'd give you the coat off her back in winter and still ask if you needed a scarf. She worked at a community center in the heart of the city, helping kids with homework, running after-school programs, organizing food drives. The pay wasn't much, but she loved it. She believed in pouring into her community. You know? That was just who she was. Now, Diane had been married to Brandon for 5 years. They met at a friend's barbecue, and at first, he seemed like everything she'd prayed for. Charming, smooth-talking, made her laugh until her stomach hurt. They got married in a small ceremony, nothing fancy, just family and close friends. Started their life together in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, both of them working regular jobs, dreaming about the future. They talked about having kids someday, buying a house with a backyard, growing old together. You know, the dream. But somewhere around year 3, things started shifting. Brandon got a new job in sales, and suddenly he was different. Staying out later, always on his phone, tilting the screen away when she walked by. Started making little comments about their life, about how they should be doing better, living bigger. He'd say things like, "We're not getting any younger, Diane. When are we going to start really living?" And she'd look around their apartment, at the life they'd built together, and wonder what was wrong with what they already had. The complaints got worse. He'd come home and criticize everything. The apartment was too small. Her job didn't pay enough. She wasn't ambitious enough. Every word was like a little cut, you know? Death by 1,000 paper cuts. And Diane, bless her heart, she tried. She tried so hard to save what they had. She'd cook his favorite meals, try to plan date nights, suggest counseling. But Brandon was already gone. His body was there, but his heart had checked out. What Diane didn't know was that there was someone else. Her name was Crystal, and she worked in Brandon's office. Now Crystal was all flash and no substance, if you know what I mean. Designer bags she couldn't afford, clothes with the tags still on that she'd return after posting pictures online. She had Brandon thinking she came from money, that she was this high-class woman who could give him the lifestyle he suddenly thought he deserved. The truth? Crystal was drowning in credit card debt and saw Brandon as her ticket out. But he couldn't see that. All he saw was the fantasy she was selling, and he bought it hook, line, and sinker. Here's the thing, though. During all this mess, Diane found out she was pregnant. Not just pregnant. She was carrying triplets. 3 babies. Can you imagine? She went to that doctor's appointment by herself because Brandon said he had to work. She sat in that examination room, saw those 3 little heartbeats on the screen, and tears just started rolling down her face. She was happy, terrified, overwhelmed all at once. She wanted to tell Brandon right away, but something in her gut said to wait. Find the right moment. Make it special. She had no idea there would never be a right moment. 2 weeks later, Brandon came home with divorce papers, just walked in after work, dropped them on the kitchen counter like he was dropping off dry cleaning. Diane was cooking dinner, and she just froze. She turned around and said, "What is this?" And Brandon, cold as ice, said, "I can't do this anymore, Diane. I deserve better than this life. Better than this life. Better than her." He didn't ask if she was okay, didn't ask if they could talk about it, didn't give her a chance to tell him about the babies growing inside her. He just said he'd already signed the papers, already found a place to stay, and he'd be back for his things over the weekend. Then he walked out. Just like that. 5 years, gone in 5 minutes. Diane stood in that kitchen, dinner burning on the stove, divorce papers in her shaking hands, 3 babies in her belly that their father didn't even know existed, and she cried. Lord, she cried until she had nothing left. The next few weeks were the darkest of Diane's life. She was processing the divorce, dealing with morning sickness times 3, going to prenatal appointments alone. Her best friend Shanice was her rock, going with her to doctor's visits, holding her hand, telling her she was strong enough to do this, and Diane tried to believe her, but late at night, lying in bed alone, she wondered how she was going to raise 3 babies by herself. Then something happened that changed everything. About 2 weeks after Brandon dropped those papers on her, Diane got a letter. Certified mail from a law firm she'd never heard of. Her hands were shaking when she opened it because she thought maybe it was something about the divorce. But it wasn't. It was about her grandmother, Dorothy. Now, Diane barely knew her grandmother. Dorothy had left the family when Diane was just a baby after some big blow-up that nobody ever really explained. Diane's mama never talked about her, and when she did, it was always with bitterness. She abandoned us, her mama would say, chose herself over her family. So Diane grew up thinking her grandmother was selfish, heartless. She never expected to hear that name again, especially not in a letter from lawyers saying Dorothy had passed away. But here's where it gets crazy. The letter said Diane needed to come to the law office for a reading of the will. Dorothy had left her something. Diane almost threw the letter away. What could this woman who abandoned them possibly leave her? But something made her go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fate. She walked into that lawyer's office in her thrift store dress, pregnant belly just starting to show, expecting maybe some old jewelry or a few $1,000s at most. The attorney, this older black man with kind eyes, sat her down and slid a folder across the desk. He said, "Your grandmother wanted you to have this. She's been watching you from afar for years, and she was very proud of the woman you became." Diane opened that folder, and I'm telling you, her whole world tilted. $100 million. Not a typo, not a mistake. $100 million. In stocks, bonds, real estate, investments. Her grandmother, the woman everyone said abandoned them, had been a silent investor in tech companies back in the 90s. She got in early on companies that exploded, made smart moves, lived modestly, and built an empire in the shadows. The attorney explained that Dorothy had tried to reconnect with the family over the years, but Diane's mother and aunts only wanted her money. They didn't want a relationship, they wanted a payout. So Dorothy cut them all off. But she kept tabs on Diane. She saw how Diane worked with kids in the community, how she volunteered at shelters, how she treated people with kindness even when she didn't have much herself. And Dorothy decided that Diane was the one with a good heart, the one who deserved everything she'd built. Diane sat in that office and cried for the second time in 2 weeks, but these weren't tears of pain. These were tears of shock, of relief, of feeling like maybe God hadn't forgotten about her after all. She was sitting on $100 million while her soon-to-be ex-husband thought she was going to be struggling and broke. The irony was not lost on her. But here's what I love about Diane. She didn't go crazy with the money. She didn't quit her job and start flashing it around. She told Shanice and swore her to secrecy. Then she quietly upgraded her life in practical ways. She found a beautiful townhouse in a safe neighborhood with good schools. She got the best prenatal care money could buy. She paid off all her debts, but she kept working at that community center because that work mattered to her. The money didn't change who she was at her core. Meanwhile, Brandon was out here living what he thought was his best life. He moved in with Crystal the same week he left Diane. They were all over social media, posting pictures at expensive restaurants Brandon couldn't afford, clubs with bottle service that maxed out his credit cards, shopping sprees that made his bank account weep. Brandon thought he'd upgraded. He thought he'd finally made it. But reality has a way of catching up with you, doesn't it? Crystal was expensive, like expensive. She wanted designer everything, wanted to be seen at all the hottest spots, needed the lifestyle to match the image she was selling online. And Brandon was drowning trying to keep up. His sales commissions weren't enough. He started borrowing money from friends, from his parents, putting everything on credit cards he couldn't pay off. But he couldn't admit he'd made a mistake. His ego wouldn't let him. And Crystal? Oh, Crystal started showing her true colors real quick. She was demanding, high maintenance, and when Brandon couldn't deliver the lifestyle she wanted fast enough, she got mean. They fought constantly. She'd throw his lack of money in his face, compare him to other men, threaten to leave. The dream was turning into a nightmare, but Brandon was trapped. He'd blown up his marriage for this woman, and admitting he was wrong felt impossible. Late at night, when Crystal was asleep, Brandon would sometimes pull up Diane's social media. She'd gone quiet online, hadn't posted in months. He wondered if she was okay, if she was struggling. Part of him felt guilty, a tiny part, but mostly he felt relieved that he'd escaped before things got worse. If only he knew the truth. 6 months after he left, Crystal's house of cards collapsed. Turned out all that family money she'd bragged about didn't exist. She was being sued by credit card companies, had eviction notices piling up from before she met Brandon. The luxury lifestyle was all borrowed and fake. When Brandon discovered the truth, they had the fight to end all fights. Crystal left him for some other man she thought had real money, and Brandon was left alone, broke and drowning in debt he'd accumulated trying to impress a woman who never cared about him at all. He'd lost everything. And the worst part? He was starting to realize that what he'd had with Diane was real, and he'd thrown it away for fool's gold. While Brandon's life was falling apart, Diane was blooming. At 7 months pregnant, she was glowing. She'd moved into her new home, a gorgeous place with a nursery ready for 3 babies. She'd made smart investments with her inheritance, grown it even more, and she'd done something beautiful. She started a foundation for single mothers, helping them with housing, childcare, job training. She was turning her pain into purpose, using her blessing to bless others. When Diane went into labor, Shanice was right there holding her hand. 14 hours later, 3 perfect babies came into this world, 2 girls and a boy. She named them Destiny, Faith, and Justice. Beautiful names for beautiful babies, and when they placed those 3 babies on her chest, Diane felt a love so powerful it almost knocked the breath out of her. She looked at their little faces and knew everything she'd been through was worth it to get to this moment. Being a single mother of triplets wasn't easy. Don't get it twisted. There were sleepless nights, moments of exhaustion, times when she cried from the overwhelm of it all. But Diane had resources now. She had help. She had a support system. And most importantly, she had love. So much love for these 3 little souls who'd chosen her to be their mama. As the babies grew, so did Diane's empire. She launched a chain of community centers in underserved neighborhoods. She hired people who needed second chances, formerly incarcerated folks, single parents, people who society had written off. Her foundation grew, touching thousands of lives, and the media started noticing. There were articles about this mysterious benefactor, this young black woman making waves in philanthropy. But Diane stayed low-key. She didn't need the spotlight. The work was the reward. The triplets' first birthday was coming up, and Diane was planning a small celebration. Despite having all that money, she kept things modest. She wanted her kids to grow up grounded, grateful, kind, just like her grandmother had hoped she'd be. She hadn't thought about Brandon in months, hadn't heard from him, didn't care to. She was too busy building an incredible life. Then came the day everything collided. Diane was invited to speak at a big conference for community developers. She'd made such an impact that they wanted her to share her story. She almost said no because of the babies, but Shanice convinced her to go. "Girl, you got nannies now. Go inspire some people." So Diane showed up looking absolutely stunning, confident, successful, glowing with purpose. She was scheduled to give the keynote speech about building sustainable community programs. She was backstage reviewing her notes when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Brandon's voice. She peeked around the curtain, and there he was, in the networking area, looking rough. His suit was outdated. He'd lost weight, had this desperate energy about him. He was trying to work the room, handing out business cards, clearly trying to rebuild a career that had crashed and burned. Diane's heart was pounding, but she kept her cool. She gave her speech, and it was powerful. She talked about resilience, about turning pain into purpose, about how sometimes the worst moments in life are setups for the greatest blessings. The audience gave her a standing ovation. During the break, she was networking when she felt eyes on her. She turned, and there was Brandon, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. She watched the recognition wash over his face, then the shock, then something like horror. She could practically see the wheels turning in his head. He made his way over, stumbling over his words. "Diane? Is that really you?" She smiled politely, professionally. "Hello, Brandon." He was flustered, asking how she'd been, saying she looked amazing. Then he said, "I heard someone mention you have kids?" "Triplets." And she watched it click. The math adding up in his head. The realization that she'd been pregnant when he left. That those were his children. His face went pale. "Diane, you were pregnant? When?" He couldn't even finish the sentence. She stayed calm, centered. "Yes, Brandon. I was 8 weeks pregnant with your children when you served me divorce papers in our kitchen and walked out." The weight of his choices crashed down on him right there in front of everyone. He started apologizing, making excuses. "I didn't know. If I had known." But Diane stopped him. "You didn't ask, Brandon. You didn't care enough to ask if I was okay, if there was anything I needed to tell you. You were too busy thinking about yourself." Then he started really spiraling, asking about the babies, saying he wanted to meet them, suggesting they could maybe work things out. And here's where it got really pathetic. He said, "I heard you've done really well for yourself. This foundation, all this success. I'm really proud of you." She could see it in his eyes. He was calculating, wondering if there was a way back in. Diane looked at this man who'd broken her heart, who'd abandoned her when she needed him most, who only wanted back in now that he thought she had something to offer, and she felt nothing but pity. She smiled, not out of meanness, but out of genuine peace. "The babies are fine, Brandon. They're healthy, happy, and surrounded by love. They don't need confusion in their lives right now, and I'm doing better than fine. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He tried again. "Diane, please. I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. Can we just talk?" But she shook her head. "You wanted better, Brandon. I hope you found it. But I did find better. I found myself, my purpose, my peace. I hope you find yours." And then she walked away. Head high, heart full, free. Brandon stood there watching her leave, and the full weight of what he'd lost finally hit him. A good woman, 3 beautiful children. And though he didn't know the exact numbers, he knew she was successful beyond anything he'd ever achieve. His pride, his selfishness, his grass-is-greener mentality had cost him everything. Within a week, he was served with child support papers. He'd be paying for children he'd never even met, all because he'd been too selfish to see what he had. Meanwhile, Diane went home to her babies. She walked into that beautiful house, heard the sounds of destiny, faith, and justice laughing with their nanny. She sent the nanny home and spent the evening with her children. Bath time, story time, tucking them into their cribs. She stood in that nursery watching them sleep, 3 perfect little miracles, and felt overwhelming gratitude. The divorce hadn't broken her. It had freed her. It had cleared the path for her to step into her purpose, her power, her destiny. Sometimes the people who walk away from us are doing us the biggest favor, even though it doesn't feel like it at the time. They're making room for what's really meant for us. Diane's foundation continued to grow, touching more lives every day. Her babies grew into curious, joyful toddlers. She eventually found love again with a man who saw her worth from day one, who loved her and her children fiercely. But that's another story. The lesson here? Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Brandon couldn't see the treasure he had, so the treasure was given to someone who could appreciate it, Diane herself. She became her own hero. She didn't need anyone to save her or validate her. She saved herself and built an empire in the process. Now that is how you turn pain into power. If this story got you fired up, show me some love. Smash that like button, drop a comment telling me what you would have said to Brandon, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already because I've got more incredible stories coming your way. Remember, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Stay blessed, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.